Welcome to the Dubai Autodrome and 2013-2014 UAE National Race Day Series. As well as the UAE sport bikes out on track this weekend, there was a change to the usual race day format for the touring cars. Instead, the main event of the day was the NGK Enduro event, which was open to NGK Racing Series touring cars, as well as GT cars and a round of the Radical Middle East Cup. Also racing as a guest series this weekend was the Formula Gulf 1000 Championship, designed for young racers heading up the ladder to Formula One. But surprisingly for Dubai, overnight rain threatened all racing on the day as parts of the racetrack lay underwater. But after a break in the clouds, the sun emerged and thankfully dried out the club circuit, and racing got underway. The qualifying session saw the Radical SR8 of Tony Wells and James Littlejohn taking pole position just ahead of the less powerful SR3 of Amro Al-Hamad and newly crowned European F3 champion Ed Jones. Further down the grid, and the yellow GT class McLaren 12C of Rob Barf and Jordan Groger qualified in 9th place, while the Gulf Petrochem Seat being raced by Kostas Papantonis and Alex Anivas lined up in 11th position. And so on to the race. As the lights went out on the rolling start, it was Tony Wells who made the extra horsepower count to pull ahead of Al-Hamad, the Qatari giving chase but being caught by the British pairing of Scott Balsden and Oliver Smith. Al-Hamad and teammate Ed Jones were going to have a tough day's racing. On lap 2, they were nearly spun into turn 1 by the car of the Al Nassif brothers. And then just a few turns later, the Qatari driver rear-ended the number 9 car and both spun in the bowl section of the track. From then on, the red and gold number 69 car suffered ignition problems. And while Jones put in some stunning laps during his stint, unfortunately they were forced to retire the car later in the race. This misfortune moved the British pair of Balsden and Smith up the field, but they were to be chased for much of the race by the solo driver Salman Al-Khater. Meanwhile, the McLaren 12C GT was also putting in a strong drive. With Rob Barf at the wheel, they got off to a flying start, showing just how grippy and versatile it is against the track-bred race cars. But despite some incredible lap times which saw them slot into second overall, it was a miscalculation with the fuel, which ultimately saw them drop out of the race just 2 laps from the finish. Elsewhere, and it was turning out to be a very good day for the ML Racing team of Mark Jordan, Graham Hanna, and Ahmed Al-Hamadi, racing in the Clubman class. Following a slow start, they soon saw off Ashkan Abdul Malik in the number 11 SR3. Then later in the race, they lapped their Clubman class rivals, Brian Riley and Dave Anderson, eventually bringing home their car first in class and just 4 laps down on the winning SR3. For Riley and Anderson, on their first race at the Dubai Autodrome, they made up 3 places on the day despite a spin later in the race. So a good result overall for the British pair. Finishing behind them was the team of Salem and Mohammed Al Nassif and Mohammed Al Hassawi. Following a spin involving Amr Al Hamad and then one of their own making later in the race, their number 9 SR3 Radical completed the race with 80 laps under their belt, despite looking very battle-scarred at the rear. At the head of the Super Sports class, and the British team of Scott Balsden and Oliver Smith had just 1 lap in hand ahead of Salman Al-Khater as a result of a late spin. But despite the Qatari driver's best efforts, there was no way of making back the ground. And as the checkered flag dropped, he had to be satisfied with a second step of the podium behind Balsden and Smith, who took the class win. Ahead of the Brits, and on a very different race strategy, was the Gulf Petrochem Seat raced by father and son team Kostas Papantonis and Alex Anivas. Thanks to a shorter mandatory pit stop, they managed to stay well upfield. And despite finishing 11 laps behind the eventual winners, the Greek pair drove a measured race and crossed the line second overall.
It was a test for us. For endurance, it was our first mini endurance, any kind of endurance. And it was kind of both. The first session was a sprint race for us, so we're trying to really boost. And the second session was on endurance pace. It was really fun for us because it was, as I said, it was the first endurance. So we did some strategy. We didn't know if it was okay. It proved to be fine.
But the race winners on the day, having kept well out of trouble and having lapped several of the SR3 class cars, were the British veterans Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, who led from start to checkered flag in their SR8s. So a quick look at the race results shows that Wells and Littlejohn finished with a commanding 11-lap lead after the unfortunate retirement of the McLaren. In second place were Alex Anivas and Kostas Papantonis in the Seat Supercopa, with the Super Sports class winners Scott Balsden and Oliver Smith coming home in third place, some 5 laps behind. Now we move on to the UAE Sport Bike Championship, and this weekend saw a reduced field of riders as a result of the heavy rainfall that threatened to cancel the event. A delayed start also meant that there would only be one race for the sport bikes on the day, but it still produced plenty of action. There were no surprises following the morning qualifying as Abdulaziz Bin Laden put his Kawasaki ZX-6R on pole, just ahead of Mahmoud Tanir and Joe Oxley on the front row of the grid. And as the race got underway, Bin Laden was a little slow, but once again made sure he was first into turn 1 and then led the field in the opening laps. But while he was creating an early lead, behind him the tricky conditions were catching a few riders out. The first to fall victim to the greasy track surface was Omar Naji, who lost the front end of his Yamaha R6 on lap 1. Then just 1 lap later at the very next corner, Chris Doyle tried a daring overtake on Mahmoud Tanir and ran wide on the exit. He lost grip on the curb, and that was his day's racing over. Unfortunately for Tanir, the incident with Doyle had slowed him down, and he now found himself back in 4th place with all the work to do. On the restart, Joe Oxley on the Ducati 848 had a tussle with Gautam Melvaganon, but it was the Indian rider who eventually grasped the second place and began to chase Bin Laden in the lead. Meanwhile, Tanir was trying everything to close the gap on Oxley ahead of him, and as the laps ticked away, he drew closer to the Irishman. But at the checkered flag, it was Oxley who just sneaked the 3rd step of the podium by less than a second to the Lebanese rider. Ahead of these two, and Melvaganon had no response to Bin Laden's incredible speed around the club circuit. The Indian rider had to settle for 2nd place after 14 laps, while the Saudi ex-superbike rider Bin Laden sealed victory with an 8.5 second lead.
Today's conditions were tricky because obviously the temperatures were very different than usual, and there was loads of rubber on the ground from the tire. So more rubber means more. It gives you grip, but it gives you that movement. It was good first place, good for the team, and good for Kawasaki. And look forward to the next one.
So with just 5 racers finishing, it's Abdulaziz Bin Laden who takes the win. Gautam Melvaganon is also looking very promising this season, but it's far too early to write off Joe Oxley and last year's champion, Mahmoud Tanir. Congratulations also to the only rookie rider on the day, Ahmed Hamas, for getting out there in very challenging conditions and bringing his bike home in one piece. And finally, we take a look at one of the region's growing race series for young drivers, the Formula Gulf 1000 Championship. This weekend saw 5 racers on the grid, with last year's Gulf Sport Trophy winner Natasha Cedar on pole as a guest driver. As the lights went out for race 1, Cedar charged into the lead, closely followed by Saeed Bintouk and Abdullah Kabani, both battling for 2nd place on the opening laps. But Bintuk's experience showed, and he pulled away from Kabani, who was forced to stop mid-race with a misfire. This moved Abdullah Al-Khareji into third place. And that was how they finished, with Cedar taking the win and newcomer Adnan Bahrami finishing fourth in his very first race. Race 2 was a similar story, with Cedar once again taking the lead and being chased by Saeed Bintuk. But this time a mistake by El-Khareji gave third place to Abdullah Kabani.
We had to keep it straight, we had to really focus because he was just right behind me, just tailing me all the way, and then managed to find, get back into the rhythm as soon as possible, and we just pulled, I think, 2 or 3 second gap, and that was good.
So an exciting and unpredictable day's racing came to an end at the Dubai Autodrome, and there are plenty of repairs to be carried out before we see the drivers and riders back out on track on December 13th. Join us then for a full bill of racing, including the NGK Racing Series, UAE Sport Bikes, Porsche GT3 Cup Middle East, and more action from the Radical Middle East Cup. We'll see you then.